Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Well, thank you for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook on 1/21/21, which happens to be a palindrome. And before this hour is over, we're going to talk to an expert on vaccinations, Michael Kinch of the Washington University of St. Louis Center for Drug Discovery and other areas. But first, let's meet the panelists on this week's program, starting with the news director for the Big 550, KTRS, and co-host of the Jennifer and Wendy Show, Wendy Weiss, along with one of our founders, was there in the early days, 1987, Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, along with another founder from the Riverfront Times, rawstory.com, and the Big 550, Mr. Ray Hartman. And from 590 AM, 97.1 FM News Talk, the Dave Glover Show, and the St. Louis American, Mr. Alvin Reed. Well, Wendy, we're going to start with you because we can't go a show without talking about health and coronavirus and other matters. In Jefferson City, Republicans are floating ideas where they would wrest some of the health department power from counties and then move it to Jefferson City. For example, there's one measure that would say that counties could not close houses of worship. There's another one that says that during a pandemic, a business cannot be closed for more than 30 days. And then after 30 days, a local board has to take a look at it. If we're living in non-pandemic times, other legislation says counties can only close businesses for 7 days, and then it has to be approved by some local board. But the key is that local control of health would move from counties in the state to Jefferson City. What do you say?
Well, it's what makes it so interesting is that these Republican legislators are now in direct opposition to our Republican governor, because he's the one that has been behind the decentralized approach since the beginning of the pandemic. I can certainly see where they are coming from, and I don't say that very often about the Missouri legislature, but there are countless businesses, and you can't even give a number because the number keeps expanding by the hour, that have gone under, and they don't feel as if they have had a voice. And as our two guests several weeks ago from the county explained, the city borders on a couple of those businesses. And if the city doesn't have the same restrictions, then the county businesses are they're going to flounder and they're going to go under. So I understand what they're doing. And frankly, for the first time in a long time, I applaud them. These people are hurting in a serious way, and they want to have their voices heard somewhere by someone.
Well, philosophically, it makes sense to have the state in charge of stuff, just like there should have been a federal response to the whole virus. But unfortunately, Wendy, you're talking about Jefferson City, and the people in Jefferson City do not make good decisions almost ever. And all they're going to do is just say, we're going to open up the state. And in a pandemic, that's not the smart thing to do, I'm afraid. So I'm against the idea of giving Jefferson City any power.
Go ahead, Alvin.
I was just going to say, I'll take it a step farther than that. This is under the guise of, I feel sorry for businesses going under or having troubles and all that. This is from what Bob Onder and Andrew Koenig. This is, I'm never going to wear a mask. I got to protect my freedoms. I don't have really anything negative to say about the people who stormed the Capitol, by which this flag behind me flew over in 1987. This is not about anything other than just a whacked out view of the world right now. So, Bill, you're right. They have the votes, and others might actually feel this way. But this is driven by people who have nothing but their own self-interest.
Ray Hartman, isn't this really a question of who, the state lawmakers or the county health directors, should have the say over a county health
Well,
policy.
first of all, let's be clear about something. All the Republicans should retire the phrase, we believe in smaller government closer to home. Because on this, as with guns, as with Kim Gardner, they favor government close to home unless they disagree with that government. And in this particular case, while I do think the state should have some baseline guidance, such as simple things like mask policy in indoor spaces, the decision making that needs to be done in a county like St. Louis is very different than in Cape Girardeau or St. Joseph or wherever it is. And there is no one size fits all. I may not be Sam Page's biggest supporter, but I think his health department and the city health department and St. Charles County's health department and Jefferson counties are all doing their best with very specific
hang on now, Ray.
Information.
My
It took
My
a
good
few
friend,
of those
last
counties
summer-
a very long time to figure out how to do the right thing, Ray.
Well,
It
but
took a few of those-
you think these to Bill's point, you think these politicians in Jeff City know better what's right for the health of St. Louis County, than the
Ray,
St. County Health
yes,
Department?
Ray, well,
No.
you got to explain this to me, Mr. Hartman. Last summer,
Right.
you went on and on how Governor Mike Parson had to have a statewide mask mandate.
I just said it again. I think you should have some
usurping the
baseline.
power of the counties, and now you want the counties to have that power, not Jefferson City. What
Having
is?
a baseline, I said it tonight, having a baseline, simple public health thing that's true everywhere, which is a mask mandate, is very different than making micromanaging decisions about restaurants in any particular county. And we all feel bad for the restaurants. That's not the point. But you've got to look at each county, each city separately. And that's what their health departments are trained to do. Yes, it doesn't.
It's a question of competence. I mean, you really can't make it an ideological thing just because the state should have authority to make these decisions, but our state just does not have the brain power to do it. I mean, it's better,
guys, someday Democrats will take control of the Capitol again,
yes,
with a governor and its legislature. I don't know when, but it's going to happen someday, 20, 30 years, who knows when. The laws you decide now are going to are going to be applied for that group too. So then you'll be saying, well, no, now I think the city should have the decision. You'll say Jefferson City should have the decision and not Franklin County or St. Charles County.
I won't. I mean, I think that this trend that the Republicans have decided to impose upon people, that they know better. And really, it's mostly about the city and county. There's very few other places where the Republicans want to jump in and govern people other than like with guns and like this in the city and county. And it really needs to stop. I just think.
Well, Ray, while I have your attention, I want to ask you about.
Right.
Here we go. Senator Josh Hawley, a couple of things. You have information that 7 of his colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle want to censure or expel him. That's news this afternoon. Meanwhile, he has said that he does not want to fast track the nomination of Alejandro Mayorkas, who is the Californian who has been nominated to be the Department of Homeland Security cabinet member. So he would head up that department. Hawley says, no, I want to ask questions about this gentleman. Don't you think that as a senator, he has the right to ask questions of the president's cabinet nominees?
Well, hopefully, he won't be a senator much longer. Right now, I guess there's no homeland security issue right now in our country with all the domestic terrorism, where we just had 25,000 troops in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration, which, by the way, Roy Blunt, shout out to him. He did a great job, as much as I just think that should be said. And he's such a contrast to Hawley. 7 Democratic senators, Sheldon Whitehouse, Sherrod Brown, and some others have asked for and will have some proceeding, I suspect, with Democrats controlling the Senate as to whether Hawley and Cruz should be censured or expelled. I think Josh Hawley has a much bigger chance of getting expelled or censured, because not only did he try to obstruct the objection, but he did it after the riot, and he tried to fundraise off of it while he was doing it. And so I
feel we kind of went over that a couple of weeks ago.
I know,
but the question this week is that cabinet nominee.
No, of course
don't
he
you remember
sit on it. What does he think he's doing in the middle of a crisis?
But
really?
senators stopped the nomination of John Tower And then
This is
closer to home,
this is
Andy
homeland.
Puzder was up for a nomination,
Charlie,
and because
this
of political influence, he didn't get it. Remember when Kitty Ratcliffe's brother, John Ratcliffe, was up for a position,
Charlie,
and then Senator Richard Burr says, we're not going to get him the votes. This is what senators
this is
do.
homeland
They oppose
security
cabinet members.
in the middle of a homeland security crisis, and he's not going to win, and he's not going to have a lot of support on his side when he tries to hold this up.
He's just doubling down on the fact that he's out front as, you know, the figure of the resistance.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Bill 100%. And what's the gentleman's name again, Charlie?
Alejandro Mayorkas.
Case closed.
Oh, I don't think so.
Oh, I do. No, that's what the front. I'm gonna be the front. I'm gonna be the hater. All the haters is kind of like backing off, but Hawley's doubling down on the hate. Okay, that's cool.
You're acting as if this is new behavior. Senators all the time oppose nominees or they question them.
Not senators who just raised their fists in front of a crowd that moments later assaulted the Capitol. That's where he forgets the optics. He needs to hit the reset button. If I were in his circle, I would plead with him with everything in me to hit the reset button, Josh, and just sit on your hands for just a little while and let things cool down. But that's everything that my colleagues are saying is absolutely correct. He has made his decision. This is his political future, and he's going to go all the way with it.
Yeah, and you just can't give him a lot of credit, Charlie, about that, you know, that there's something deeper in it than this. I mean, we know who Josh Hawley is.
Well, I understand your concerns about the senator, but what he's raising about the nominee is that the nominee, according to the inspector general, approved a couple of visas for VIPs because of political pressure. And so Hawley wants to ask him those questions. It's part of the advise and consent role of the Senate, which I guess you guys don't believe in anymore unless it's used against Andy Puzder.
But everybody's got their reasons. And last I looked, how was the former president's wife in the United States of America? And he didn't have any questions about that, did he? So, you know, this is just Josh Hawley playing Josh Hawley games, and it's destructive to America. And the reasons that he's doing it is, like Bill said, to double down on I'm the man for the hate-filled crowd. It's disgusting, but, you know.
Bill McClellan, closer to home. There was a measure passed by the Board of Aldermen, signed by the mayor, that was to institute a plan to close down the city's medium security institution known as the Workhouse. Well, as it turns out, if we take whatever prisoners or inmates, I should say, and move them from the Workhouse to the city jail in downtown St. Louis, the city jail will be overcrowded and inmates will be sleeping on mattresses on the floor. This, according to the corrections director in the city. So the mayor has looked at alternatives and can't find any other correctional facilities in the state of Missouri who are willing to take these men and maybe women. And so they have found a location 4.5 hours away on the Kentucky-Tennessee border. Now Mayor Cruzen says, no, we can't close the Workhouse now, even though she signed the measure approving that. What do you think of this?
Well, good on Mayor Cruzen. Good on anybody who realizes they made a mistake and says, you know, I was wrong. And I thought she was wrong early on. I mean, the only way you can close the Workhouse is by letting people out. And, you know, once they started looking at who's in the Workhouse and realized that there's not a lot of young guys who were busted with a couple of joints and they're sitting in the Workhouse, that these are pretty dangerous people in there. Then you, so I think that you can't close the Workhouse right now. And I think that the mayor's come to a good realization, and good for her for being able to change her mind. A lot of politicians refuse to do that.
Well, the other side of that coin is she could have done a little more due diligence, or her staff could have, to find out if there were alternatives to the St. Louis City Jail in downtown St. Louis when she signed the measure. I mean, the law says, the ordinance says that they have to start planning to close the facility. I mean, that is done. Now it's going to the voters, I think, again on April the 6th, so they can kind of reverse things. Actually, that's going to be non-binding. That's a resolution, correct?
Right.
So-
Charlie, I think, first of all, I don't disagree at all with Bill about, I don't think there's an issue with whether she changed her mind. I think
that's true.
substantively, there is really overwhelming opinion in the city that it is no longer sustainable. And whatever the short-term pain is, which I'm thinking could be significant, the city cannot continue to have what's arguably the worst jail in the state of Missouri, which is saying something. And I think it has to close. And so I'm not suggesting that they've got an ideal situation. And I certainly don't blame Lyda Cruz for changing her mind. But I think substantively, there's a great sense of unity among most people in the city that this thing has to.
Well, I got to tell you something. Much of the effort to close it is led by columnist Tony Messenger, and I've been told
He's right.
by the city that he's never toured it. Now, I did tour it a year ago in November, and if there were problems, I didn't see it. Now, maybe I'm not the best jail inspector, but I do know that Ben and Jerry, the ice cream experts, are buying advertising, full-page ads in the Post-Dispatch to close it. And I talked to corrections officials. Ben hasn't been there. Jerry hasn't been there. And I think people should tour it because when I was there, I got a tour with Judge Jimmy Edwards, public safety director. And this was pre-COVID, and the inmates were hugging him, high five, elbow bumps. They were as friendly with him as you could imagine. I think that's because they knew him when he was a judge. And if there were problems, they weren't yelling about it. I didn't see the mold that was described. I didn't see
wait a minute, Charlie.
Well, let me put you to Tony Messenger. But Tony looks into stuff pretty darn well. And I don't know if he has personally been there or not. You say he hasn't. I don't know.
But if he has since then, I'll stand corrected.
He looks into things pretty well.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's lazy. Far from it.
Lazy, you want to Pulitzer Prize on stuff like this. And he is.
But not on this story. Not on this story.
I know, but the point is you do not have to have a guided prison tour, which is most of the time when they give you prison tours, you don't get to see kind of everything.
Cosmetic.
And so I think
I don't know.
I'll defer to Tony on this. Let's put it that way.
No,
Tony either.
Wait a minute. Let's
take a tour. Take a tour.
Wait, let's take Tony out of it.
Yeah.
You mean to tell me that authoritative figures came to a prison, a jail, wherever, and they said, like, how is it? And they're all high-fiving and whatnot. It's prison. Jimmy Edwards left. Tony Messenger left. Who he ever been? They all leave. And what are they left with? A whooping. Please, don't you watch prison movies, man? Come on. He's like, oh, yeah, it's great.
Alvin, this isn't in the heat of the night. I mean, I don't really think that prisoners have to endure the same kinds of treatment that they endured in the 50s or the 40s.
No, wait a minute. No. At the workhouse, hold it. At the workhouse, they were like, the guards were having Friday night fights and carrying on, and other inmates standing around cheering. And Charlie, I didn't go to.
That was 10 years ago.
Charlie, I didn't go to Alcatraz until long after it was closed. I didn't have to go to Alcatraz to know that, this place is hellish.
Okay. I did go to Alcatraz also, and Alcatraz is actually quite damp and dark, and you wouldn't want to be there. But this place, I didn't see the mold. It didn't smell bad. It was recently painted. They had a nice basketball court. They had a library, computer room. I checked out the restrooms, where they slept.
How many stars did you give it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. No, but and by the way, it's not a prison. It's a jail. And so there's a little bit of a difference.
Wait.
There have been stories about the bad conditions there, Charlie. It's hard to argue that the conditions are good. It's just, what are we supposed to do with some of these people?
Right.
Well,
and Charlie, by definition,
I think they have to stay right there as opposed to going to the Kentucky border.
Actually,
where their lawyers are going to be able to visit them.
I got sidetracked, but I agree with that. Sending them to the border of Kentucky and Tennessee is a bunch of lawsuits waiting to happen on the city of St. Louis. I disagree with that. You're sending them down to, just the storm the Capitolville. That ain't gonna work out. Okay, so that's a bad idea.
Okay, while I got you,
maybe just leave them in a comfort inn where they are.
Cities have done that. They have done that with ankle bracelets.
Okay, well, that may be.
Hey, Alvin Reed. Albert Watkins, local attorney, represents QAnon shaman, who is sometimes known as Jacob Anthony Chelmsley, other times as Jake and Jelly. He's probably best known as the guy with the face paint and the bullhorns who was caught inside the U.S. Capitol. And he's now in another state, and Watkins says that he should have been pardoned by the president because the president goaded him on to storm the Capitol. Meanwhile, 21-year-old Emily Hernandez of Sullivan, Missouri, did cooperate with authorities. She went in front of a judge this week, and she's one who entered the Capitol unlawfully and actually was caught on camera carrying a piece of a sign from Nancy Pelosi's office. So what do you think? Should we have mercy on Shaman and Hernandez, or would you throw the book at him?
Yeah, speaking of Alcatraz, we should just reopen it. Everybody should get the full, every last day that they could be sentenced to. They should be sentenced to. They should not be Gentile with these people. They are gentle, not Gentile, excuse me, gentle with these people. They should get the full extent of the law. I mean, this is just, it's absolutely ridiculous what they did, but also it violated federal law. And short of turning in the guy that, you know, killed that Capitol police officer, everybody else should get the full definition of the sentence of the law. And the judge had to ask the lady from Sullivan, Missouri, to speak up. And she said, I will. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. And the attitude of the judge was perfect. She said, I bet you are. Right. So, hey, full extent, no mercy. You did it. Pay the price. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time.
Well, I agree. Go ahead, Bill. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say two quick counterpoints, Alvin. First, the people who are really guilty was Donald Trump and all his enablers who went along with this big lie theory that the election was stolen. And nothing's going to happen to those people, the ones in the media, the ones in Congress. The second thing is there were two kinds of people who went to the rally. And one group was out there to really cause damage and, you know, the Proud Boys and the 3%ers. And the others, you know, I think I saw a woman named Monica Hess wrote something and said that some of these people look like they got in the wrong line, mistakenly got in the line for Insurrection Mountain at the Magic Kingdom. And I think some did go there because, you know, they liked going to his rallies and it was always fun, a dark kind of fun. And they went to Washington, D.C., and they weren't intending. I mean, I don't think you can throw the book at everybody. That's all.
Yeah, I don't buy that when the peaceful protesters march on Ferguson and burn down the CVS. And I don't buy it here. You know, you've seen enough to know that this kind of thing is possible, especially today. We've seen it time and time again when the wrong element infiltrates the right element and chaos ensues. And so I say stay away from the chaos. There are a million different ways to exercise your rights of peaceful protests than possibly getting involved with something that can become deadly as this did.
Well, that's a danger.
Can I say something, Bill? Bill, how did I say something about it? To that point, there is an analogy, which is no one is suggesting that just because you attended the rally and didn't go into the Capitol, that you should somehow be prosecuted for what happened in the Capitol. Okay, no, and that's the analogy to Ferguson. So my point is, no one's saying if you just happen to show up and then you left, you didn't go near the Capitol, there's no problem. And that's sort of like the peaceful protesters in your scenario. But as far as, and I agree with Alvin that it needs to be harsh. But the fact, and I had Al Watkins on my show, and he was as entertaining as ever. And it's a serious matter. But I think the question isn't about mercy. The question is, if the prosecutors think they can build a case against Donald Trump, and they think it will be helpful to have people that will testify that they did what they did because of his words to them, then my guess is those folks might, and it doesn't mean they're going to get off scot-free, but those folks might get a different deal than if they don't cooperate. And I don't think that's outrageous. I agree that
Ray, are you really anticipating a trial for the former president of the United States where that guy comes in wearing his bullhorns and he's one of our witnesses.
I'm just saying if that happens, if that would be the scenario under which they'd give him a deal. And I would.
I'm sorry.
It's got to be.
I agree with Alvin. I mean, if you're walking over broken glass into the U.S. Capitol and the police are, sending mace and tear gas, and you're walking through that going inside,
you deserve the match.
I'm sorry. You deserve 6 to 12 months.
I agree. And you also, I would slap if my face was anywhere near where the police officer was killed. I'd tell him, like, you're facing conspiracy to commit murder of a police officer. They would have so many.
Charlie, they came close to killing senators and congressmen.
I know it. They brought the. It looks like she got into the office.
We're beating on police officers and throwing stuff. Absolutely throw the book at those people. I'm not.
And I agree with Alvin generally. I'm just saying I think some people, depending on the circumstance, might get a little bit of it.
Gotcha. Okay, Alvin, 2-minute warning, a little less than 2 minutes here. John Collins Mohammed is a member of the Board of Aldermen, and now he does not want to reduce the size of the board from 28 members to 14, even though voters in 2012 approved just that. What do you think?
Best thing, we go from 28 to 14, quit the pity party. Hey, if you want to win a seat in the aldermanic body, win a seat in the aldermanic body.
Well, I like the idea of small government. I'd rather have, 28, so people get to know their aldermen. It's like the county council. I'm not even sure who my county council person is.
I like to follow the fellow founder, because I used to be opposed to that. And I actually don't really care what they do, because I don't think, because I think either way is fine. But I think that the idea that they're all still representing almost 11,000 people, which is more than any city council person anywhere else in St. Louis is, I don't think that they have to have a smaller board. I don't see
city
why.
Councils like Kirkwood and others, we pick how many people we need, and we feel as though that's what's needed. St. Louis has got less than 300,000 people, and you don't need 28 people to
why? You're represented by your council person probably represents 5,000 people. Even right now,
actually,
28 they represent 11,000.
Real quick, most municipalities like Kirkwood, we don't have by ward. The 5 people represent everybody in Kirkwood, so it's not broken up into numbers like it is in the city.
And
by the way, the city is malfunctioning. So thus, anything you can do to help stop that malfunction.
All right,
you think going from 28 to 14 will cut down the malfunction?
Hey, let's take a break here because we have Michael Kinch in the wings. He wants to join us, or at least he's going to join us, we'll put it that way. And we're going to talk about vaccines. That's on Next Up. Don't go away.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of 9 PBS.
Well, thanks for joining us on Next Up. This is the program where we grill community leaders and ask them questions about the news of the day. And we're so fortunate this week to be joined by Michael Kinch, who's an associate vice chancellor at WashU, also a professor of biochemistry and molecular biophysics at the school, where he's also the director of the Center of Research, Innovation, and Biotechnology and Drug Discovery, both centers at Washington University. Also the author of many books, including A Prescription for Change, the Looming Crisis in Drug Development. And we thought we'd talk about vaccines and other issues with you, Dr. Kinch. Thank you so much for joining us on Next Up.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, I know you know as much about vaccines as just about anybody. And I'd like to ask you about the rollout, if you don't mind. To date, the CDC reports that 36 million doses of the vaccine have been distributed throughout the country, but only about 16 million have been administered. And we were hoping to have 20 million administered by the end of December. What do you think's going on right now?
Well, frankly, there's been a lack of coordination. It's not that we don't know what we need to do, which is obviously to get the vaccine into the arms of people all around the country. We just have been very poor in deploying it. And so it really comes down to logistics. And this has been an uncoordinated logistical mess so far. but it's not too late. I mean, we can still turn this around, and we have to keep in mind that we've got to get 350 million Americans, which means 700 million doses administered as soon as we can, and only then will we return back to normal.
We are now first of all, Dr. Kinch, thank you so much for being here. We are in the second day of the Biden administration. He has made no secret of the fact that there is no longer a political component. He's really hit the ground running. Dr. Fauci was at the White House speaking with members of the press. Do you like what you're seeing so far in terms of the shift in direction?
It's still early days, but yes. And what I mean by the yes is that we need to really follow the medicine and the science and not the politics. And there's been too much politics contaminating the vaccine and everything about the coronavirus. And so I'm hopeful that actually we can now start talking about what is best for people, what's best for their medical conditions, and how are these decisions going to be made based on good science.
Bill?
Yeah, doctor, I don't want you to think I read scientific stuff, because I don't, but our producer sent us something you wrote for a magazine called Stat. And on July 31st, you were talking about the rush to get a vaccine out. And you said disastrous outcome is not only possible, but in fact, quite likely. And do you think we avoided a disastrous outcome? And how did we do it if we did?
So far, yes. And we've actually been incredibly fortunate. And, all the bad luck of 2020 maybe has turned around in terms of the vaccine. So the concerns that I had on rushing a vaccine is that a vaccine causes a long-term change in your immune system. And if you don't change your immune system in the right way, you can actually have toxicity and problems. And that was my fear back then. And it remains a fear that all of us will have forever. But the good news is that we have seen remarkably little toxicity. There has been some very well-detailed examples of toxicity, but for the most part, we've been very lucky there. And we've been even luckier in terms of being able to have efficacy rates, meaning protection rates of 95% or so. And so I'm happy to say that the worries that I expressed in July and in April are thankfully unfounded so far.
Good. Thank you.
Ray.
Well, Doctor, being as how I cannot pronounce most of the words in your title, a lot of them are in Bill's title and mine also. What do you say to? There are people right now, lots of them in our community and all others, that have fears themselves for whatever reason about taking the vaccines. What do you have to say to them, and what do you think we can do sort of to get people over those fears about the safety of the vaccine?
Absolutely. Well, one thing is that we need to recognize this is absolutely nothing new. And actually, I wrote an entire book about this that came out, I think, in 2017, 2018, which basically documents the fact that every single vaccine has always been met with some form of an anti-vaccine movement. And a lot of times that's because, frankly, people are afraid of a vaccine because they don't understand it. But it's complicated by the fact that, unlike a medicine, which is given to someone who is already known to be ill, a vaccine is given to someone who's healthy with the presumption that it's going to prevent a future disease. And a lot of people think, well, I'll never get that disease. So the way in which we combat that is to be fully transparent. We need to talk about what we know about the safety, what we know about the efficacy, but more importantly, what we don't know yet about the safety or the efficacy. And I think only in being fully transparent and telling both what we do and do not know are we going to be able to convince people that they should be able to do this. And the data so far suggests that it's far safer than most of us predicted and far, far more efficacious than most of us predicted.
Elvin.
Following up on what Bill said about the article from July, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to get the vaccination when it was talked about, a year ago or, 10 months ago. I wanted to be first in line. Obviously, I'm not going to be, even though I am 60. But, but your article kind of, frightened me. And it wouldn't change my mind. And I know that wasn't your intent. But now we are where we're at now. And as Ray said, you're still getting the people who are, hesitant. What I don't understand is like, okay, part of this has got to be public relations. And just what you said, I'm still waiting for the billboards and the radio and the television commercials that, in 1960, one out of how many Americans got measles or got mumps, or in 1945, one out of every American, got polio. I just don't see the effort to just break it down to like, listen, get the vaccine, because in the past, this is what it used to be, and this is what it is now. Also, why is there not a day? So like, hey, if we can get this many people vaccinated, that's how fast we can get back to normal. So put a date out there or put a number out there. Make it, simplify it.
Absolutely. And I think that that's been part of the problem, is that we spent many months saying, well, this is, or arguing about whether COVID-19 was a real problem or not. And whether, still we argue about masks. So you're absolutely right. We need to be consistent in our messaging. We need to point out to people that if you get vaccinated, it will not only help you, it will help your neighbors, your family members, because it'll prevent you from infecting them. And so there are many in our community, those who are elderly, those who have had perhaps cancer or autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis that are being treated for those, that are potentially going to remain susceptible to COVID even after they're vaccinated. And so we need to really convey a consistent message saying, do this not just for yourself, but for your community. And it needs to be everybody that is participating in this. And we need to stop arguing about some of the silly, again, we talked about politics and other misconceptions about the vaccine. And we can only do that if we're conveying accurate information and complete information.
Can I follow up real quick? Because one of the things I've heard from people I know is, I don't want to get an autoimmune disease. That's why I'm leery of the vaccine. Your response to that is?
The likelihood of you're getting an autoimmune disease from the vaccine is vastly, thousands of times less likely than you're getting a serious disease or dying of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you.
Simple as that.
Doctor, the historian Ken Burns was on NPR this week, and he said that in 1947 in New York City, every single person in New York City, 6 million people, was vaccinated within 1 month. 6 million doses administered in 1 month in one city. Why can't we do something like that now? What's the problem in 2021?
Well, frankly, and I talk about this in Between Hope and Fear, the book on vaccines and the anti-vaccine movement, we have basically, whether it's due to the internet, I'm not sure what it is, but there was a book that came out called The Death of Expertise. And we as a population have basically decided that every individual is smarter than all the experts and that vaccines is something that we should avoid. And so back in 1947, when there was a smallpox risk, which is what you're referring to, there were mandates, and the government said and conveyed very accurately and consistently to help yourself and your neighbors, please get vaccinated, because we don't want smallpox being turned loose in New York City again. Plus, they mandated it. Your kids couldn't go to school. When I was a child, I couldn't go to school unless I'd had my measles, mumps, and rubella, and my diphtheria, and pertussis and tetanus. And we have, over the last, especially 20 to 30 years, seen the rise of movements that say, well, maybe I don't want to have my kids, and I object to it for religious reasons or personal reasons, and those have been accepted, and we've allowed that to occur. And frankly, my impression at least is the reason we've allowed that to occur is that prior to 2020, we had forgotten about the damage that infectious diseases can cause. And maybe one good thing that might come out of COVID-19 is a recognition that all of these diseases are still out there, and the only way we can prevent them is through vaccination.
Earlier this week, I believe, it could have been late last week, there was the assertion on the part of the head of Moderna that this was going to be with us forever, that it would become endemic rather than pandemic. Can you speak to what that means, Dr. Kinch?
Absolutely. So we basically are fighting a moving enemy. And what I mean by that is that viruses really like to mutate. And eventually we will reach a point where this virus will mutate to the point where the current vaccine will probably not be useful. And so we're going to need a next vaccine, a next generation, if you will, vaccine, similar, but a bit different from what happens with influenza every year. And so the other part of this is that the virus can also live in animals, not just in people. So even if we get rid of the virus from all people, it could still come back into the human population from our animal companions. And so as a consequence of that, we need to accept the fact that just like measles, mumps, and rubella, and all the other viruses and bacteria that we're familiar with, this is going to be something that future generations are going to have to deal with. And a pandemic will eventually end. An endemic just stays in the population and keeps circulating. And we're looking at an endemic situation. And that makes it crucial to become vaccinated. So I'll take a minute and kind of bore you with some science. The more virus that's out there, the more chance that it can mutate. The more chance it can mutate, the more likely that the vaccine will fail. The flip side of that is, if we get everyone vaccinated and everyone wears masks for the next few months, and we get ahead of the virus, there will be less virus out there, and therefore less mutation and less likelihood that it's going to be able to escape the vaccine. So the faster and more efficiently we act, the better the outcome.
Doctor, you threw me for a loop a minute ago when you said that this might, for elderly people and those with cancer, this might not work. And as a old person who has cancer and just got a shot, I'm kind of startled. You mean this shot may not work on older people?
Well, the immune system in general starts to decrease with age. And so there will be people that will receive the shot and will still be susceptible simply due to the fact that their immune system is under stress, either because of age or perhaps prior experience, again, with cancer therapies or other types of treatments. And for that reason, and this is a term that's been really misused and politicized, we have to reach what's called herd immunity. And the idea of herd immunity is, if you are, let's say that in your case, you've had the vaccination, but you're still susceptible. Herd immunity will be kicking in if you don't ever come into contact with someone that has the virus, which means that they have been vaccinated and are prevented from being able to carry that virus. So that's where we have to think about the vaccine as not just something that we're doing for ourselves, but something that is selfless. We're doing for our neighbors, our friends, our family members. And if we convey that kind of consistent messaging, which also happens to be completely aligned with the science, then I think we'll be in much better shape. And all of us will be protected, even those within whom the vaccine maybe won't work as well because of their past history.
Doctor, this may go to what you were talking about with mutations, but we hear a lot about these new strains of the virus, the various names for them, whether it's from the UK or wherever it is. How concerned should we be about those? Because,
we need to remain very concerned because, again, the virus is a moving target, and the UK variant and the South African variant, and there are now some suggestions of some American variants. Those are inevitable. And again, the virus is going to keep changing, and the more virus that's out there, the faster it's going to change. But the flip side is the less virus, i.e. the more that people are able to fight it through vaccination and by wearing masks, the more we can get ahead of it. And
is it your sense that the current vaccines will cover the variants that we know about or not?
So the data that has come out so far suggests that the current vaccines still work against the UK variant. And I believe the studies are underway right now for the South African variant. And it's likely, based on the residues, the parts of the molecule that have changed, that probably the vaccine will continue to work. But I can predict with pretty much 100% certainty that probably 2, 3, 4 years down the road, there'll be a virus strain that doesn't. And so which doesn't respond. So what we now need to be doing right now, and thankfully we are, is developing new vaccines, second generation vaccines. Now that doesn't mean wait to get your second generation. It means get the first generation, and the second generation will work even better.
And so the virus itself, it's not sitting around doing like this, saying like, okay, they came up with a vaccine. How do I, avoid that? It does this just naturally, correct?
random mutation leads to bad things. Now, it can lead to good things over time, but it usually, in the case of viruses, leads to bad things.
Okay. And okay, so I got my first shot. I didn't. I really want one, but I got my first shot. At that point, do they give me a slip of paper and tells me come back on this day at this time to get your second shot, or do I mean, how does that work?
Well, so that's the way that it should work, and that's the way in which the science has shown that it can work. And that is that the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, which are the two that are approved so far, have either 4 weeks or 3 weeks in between visits and between the first shot and then the booster. Now, this raises what's going to potentially be a pretty politically messy thing, which is that there are discussions both in the US and the UK about saying, well, let's take the second shot that for the most part was being put in a freezer. So when you got your first shot, the second shot's put in a freezer to wait for you to come back a few weeks later. And people are saying, let's use that second shot and immunize people, twice as many people, with the assumption that then there'll be some future shot that'll arise and then future vaccine that'll come in, and we can then give you your second boost. My concern with that is, frankly, that we don't have any science to say that this vaccine will continue to work as well. And we've got remarkable data with the current situation, with the current way in which it's being used. So I'm hesitant, frankly, about saying, let's use all of the first doses and get everyone a first dose and then come back and do a second dose. Because if instead of 3 or 4 weeks, it's 3 or 4 months, we frankly don't have the data to say that it'll still work as well. And we should never forget that we have got an amazingly effective vaccine that seems to work 90 to 95% of the time. And we don't want to squander that.
Locally, are you a little concerned? It's a little confusing because in St. Louis County, for example, you can sign up to get the vaccine through Mercy Hospital or BJC or St. Louis County and its Department of Health. Shouldn't there be one centralized location where everyone signs up and then, I don't know, either shows up at Walgreens, CVS, or Busch Stadium to get this, and everybody kind of knows what the drill is going to be? From what I understand, doctors who aren't affiliated with the big hospitals, they themselves don't know where to get the vaccines.
Absolutely. And this is part of the problem. It was announced earlier today that there basically wasn't a national plan for doing this. And frankly, from work I had done in the past, working with the Defense Department and other groups in preparation for a pandemic, we know how to do this. We've just chosen not to. So it seems like perhaps yet as of the last 36 hours, we've begun to start putting this together, but you're exactly right. We need to be able to track who's gotten the vaccine as well as who hasn't gotten the vaccine, because we don't want people to fall between the cracks, and not everyone is mobile as perhaps we are. And are able to go to Mercy or to WashU or to other places. And so we really need to spend a lot of energy figuring out how do we get the largest number of people vaccinated and protected as we can.
Going into the winter, there was grave concern that there would be the double threat of the flu, and then of course the COVID-19. If there is good news, it seems as though a lot more people took advantage of the flu shot this year. Have you seen data to suggest that did we skirt a catastrophe, or is it still a possibility when it comes to that double threat of the flu and COVID?
Well, we're in prime time flu season right now. So it's too early to declare victory, but so far the social isolation and the masks and all are having the side effect, if you will, of helping to protect against flu. Now, it's interesting because if we look back 6 months ago, we were seeing the same thing in South America, where in the Southern Hemisphere, they tend to get the flu in our summer months, their winter months. And we saw remarkably low flu rates. And so that is one bright event, which is that flu appears to be less problematic. But keep in mind that flu kills, in a good year, 30,000 people, in a bad year, 60,000 people. And as horrendous as that is, and that is truly horrendous, we're talking about 400,000 people that have died in the past year. Mm-hmm. So sadly, it's almost a rounding error when you look at flu as compared to COVID-19. And I think that a lot of that misperception about how bad COVID-19 is because people have said, or some people have said, oh, this is just kind of a version of the flu. It's no worse. And I can tell you it's tenfold worse than the average, at least. And when the real numbers come in, when we really have a chance to go through the mortality data, I bet it's going to be far more than tenfold.
Doctor, I think I can speak for a lot of people when I say, when I get my second shot, I'm going to feel liberated. And I'm going to get in the car and I'm headed out to see some friends. I'm going to go to Arizona. I might go to Ohio, all different Texas. Now, are you telling me that since it's older people like me who are getting these shots first, that when we get in the cars and we start on our road trips, we're looking at like another potential catastrophe?
Yes. And I'll tell you that if you do exactly what you just said, you're looking at a personal catastrophe, because the data show that it's probably 2 to 3 weeks after your second shot that you.
Well, I actually meant waiting 3 weeks.
Okay. So that's important, because you've got to get that second shot and give it a little bit of time to work. But again, we need to think about, COVID-19 is going to be endemic. There are going to be people, and perhaps you, perhaps others, that are still potentially going to be susceptible. And one thing that is unlikely, but it's not impossible to imagine, is that we know that immunization protects people in the long term. But let's say that you've been immunized, it's been 3 or 4 weeks, you're feeling good, you're going to go on a trip, and you go to a diner, you get lunch, and you become infected. Your immune system is probably going to kick in, and you're going to be protected and never know what happened. But what we don't yet know is whether there will be a short period of time in which you can transmit that virus to someone else. So you could end up being kind of a typhoid Mary, if you will, and causing harm to someone else, even though you had no intention of doing so. So we need to, again, understand more about this, let the data happen. So if everyone just counts to 3 weeks after their second shot and returns back to normal, we have a risk that we might be endangering others around us. So I think it's probably a good bet to be a bit more conservative about that. Yes, we all want to return back to normal and go on trips and everything else, but we need to recognize that the data are going to determine what happens.
Doctor, did you say something about the last 36 hours? Something happened in the last 30.
I was going to say the same thing, Ray.
I didn't know. I got to change the subject briefly, because another book you wrote, and I'm just interested in this topic while we have you, is about drug prices. And it seems that that's one area that there's bipartisan consensus that the drug prices are too high, and bipartisan inaction on that subject in the past, however many decades. Can you talk to us a little about that? I know we've got limited time.
Well, we've been, some of the work I've been doing at WashU has been tracking what have been the sources of innovation responsible for medicines. And the one subject that I swore I would never touch was drug pricing, because it was such a mess and it's politicized and everything else. And my wife, who actually, full disclosure, works at Pfizer, said, because of this fear, you need to address this. And when we waded into it, we basically have found that it is a complete mess. Drug pricing, we all recognize the problem, but when you look at who's responsible for it, it's not just the big bad pharmaceutical company. And believe me, there are many big bad pharmaceutical companies, and we point that out in the book, but it's how the medicines are distributed. It's how the medicines are created. It's the fact that it takes, depending upon who you believe, somewhere between $1 and $3 billion to develop every new medicine. And some of that can explain the costs. But frankly, what amazed me is that the cost to research and develop a new medicine is, again, a rounding error as compared to the price of medicine. And it fundamentally boils down to the fact that the price of medicines are determined by what the market will bear, meaning how much can a company charge or the distributor charge until there's finally a point where people scream and yell and say, I'm not going to pay that. And sadly, we've not reached that point. The prices continue to rise and people continue to pay. And this is becoming a real problem. I mean, it's been a real problem, but it's affecting more and more people every year.
Just 30 seconds to go, Alvin.
All right. I'm not holding you to this. I understand, but My birthday is September the 6th. I'll be 61. Okay. Am I kicking it on my 61st birthday and we're kind of back to normal? Is that possible by 4th of July? But let's focus on September the 6th. Just what do you think?
I don't think there will ever be a return to where we were 12 months ago. But I think we will be at a new normal that is much better than our current normal. I think we'll be going back to work. I think restaurants will be open, but it's going to be crucial that we protect those whose immune systems can't protect them. And so that we get good vaccination, that we continue probably to wear masks even up till that time.
Large crowds?
Dr. Kinch, I'm sorry to say we have to cut things off here. So why don't we bring you back when your next book comes out in April?
Happy
Michael Kinch with us from Washington University. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of 9 PBS.